Howdy, you must be from the west.
Well, heck yeah.
Today is March 8th, and we are here for the Public Works and Finance Committee meeting. And we have here on Zoom, we have Ann Zabala, and in the presence, we have Art and myself, Maureen Laughlin, and various other people in the audience. So today we have a series of 6 items that we're going to look at, and let's start. Approval of the February 22nd, 2021 Public Works Finance Committee minutes. Any questions or concerns? Ann?
No, they look good.
Look good to me, too.
Look good to me, too. They're approved. Okay, we have Sarah Banks on Zoom about the disbursement report on February 2021.
Hi. So looking at month end February 28th, 2021, our total expenditures came to $3,145,719.49. Payroll came in at $1,088,423. A few expenditures that I want to point out for you. We had our payment to BSNA for our new software implementation. That payment was $173,485. We had another PD payment for the new police station, and that was $515,656. We paid our half payment to our workers' comp, and that was $180,606. Our quarterly payment to Whitcomb for the dispatch services, quarterly January through March 2021, that was $146,462.76, and then we had a well 10 phase 2 contractor payment for $246,505.67.
Any questions for Sarah?
Looks good.
Good. Approved. How about the fourth quarter?
Yes, the fourth quarter financials.
Yes.
Yep, so this is, if you look at this as overall, this is where we came out in 2021. As you look down the way, and you may remember that we did kind of do a budget cutback in preparation for COVID, unsure of what to anticipate with revenues and expenditures. So as you go down, you can see that the operations and majority of the funds are probably sitting more around 75 or less %, unless it was an internal service fund or a capital that we had to push forward. But otherwise, you'll see the expenses are a little lower than normal. But our revenues, thankfully for us, we did end the fiscal year with revenues coming in at where, or possibly even a little higher than anticipated. So how we run our operational funds at year end, we don't keep heavy fund balances in our accounts. So we transfer any remaining funds out of that operational account into a capital account for future projects. So across the board, you're going to see the transfers in general funds, streets, recreation and culture. That's actually a big one. You're going to see that those are higher than normal come year end, as well as the water fund, sewer fund. And that's because we had far less expenses than anticipated due to making sure that we had enough to cover if we had a lack in revenues. Overall, though, with revenues and expenditures, we came out 67% in revenues, 62% in expenditures, and everything for the most straightforward from there. But I'd certainly be willing to answer any questions that you might have on any of the percentages that you're looking at.
Any questions, Art?
Nope. Sarah, you answered them along the way. I was wondering those things, and you nailed them. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Ann, any questions?
Nothing for me.
So let's go back to the first one, since we didn't, can we move to affirm that, and as well as electronic signatures, I think is what we need?
Yes.
Okay.
And I believe Lori has all that set up now because you did it last time. So you should be good to go there if you approve it.
And so there's also an action item here, which is to approve the fourth quarter financial report. And we move for that too.
Yes.
Yes. Ann?
Agreed.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sarah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, who is Scott, or are you going to handle the next one, Bill?
Oh, Scott's there.
Scott will be presenting.
There we go.
There he is.
The Indian Hills Waterline Improvement Bid Results and Contract Award. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. So you had mentioned this is the Indian Hills Waterline Improvement Project. This project's going to be replacing existing 6-inch water with 8-inch water main, pretty much along Indian Hills Drive from Northwood Drive up to Hatster Street and further north along that. And another piece too over on Pine Kiln Road needs to be addressed as well. And this upsizing in the water main pipe is necessary for a future project that will be coming out, and that'll be the Indian Hills Booster Station. So in this area, we have sufficient flow for domestic, for your everyday use water, but we are deficient in fire flow. And the current booster station is a below ground booster station that, you know, it's getting past its serviceable time. And we're going to be building a new booster station that's above ground that meets all the current standards. But this project, which was broken away from that, is the part of the project that's just necessary to essentially upgrade the water pipes before that one happens. So this project we put out to bid on February 6th with a engineer's estimate of $998,403. We received back bids and opened 2 responsive bids on March 2nd, 2021. And we received a late bid a day later. FedEx said that they lost their bid. But of the 2 responsive bids we received one from Germer Construction, $899,560, and one from ML Albright for $1,041,633.50. We've evaluated the bids, and JB did an evaluation and recommend accepting Germer Construction's low bid of $899,560 and awarding the bid and authorizing staff approval of the change orders in an amount not to exceed 10% of the contract amount. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about it.
Any questions, Ann? All right.
Yeah, is this budgeted in this year's expenditures?
Yes, this is.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, this was, if I may, this was authorized in the FY 2021 budget. It's also, as Scott indicated, part of the booster station project in order to make sure that that booster station is able to provide the appropriate pressures for fire flow.
So does this go on the consent agreement, or consent agenda or not? Because the amount, should we put it on the consent agreement?
Doesn't seem controversial, but it's up to the council.
I don't
votes
think
for
it needs-
consent.
Consent is okay with me.
Yeah, I think because we've already budgeted for it, it's part of a project we've anticipated. I think we should recommend the acceptance.
Yes.
Okay? We'll put it on
Recommend the
consent
acceptance as well as make it on the consent agenda, right?
Right.
Yes.
agenda. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So now moving on to the residential street standard update proposal. Bill Belknap.
Good afternoon. Let's see if I can make sure. Okay, hopefully, and you can see the presentation.
Yes.
Perfect. So this afternoon, we are discussing a possible amendment to the city's residential street standards. For a little bit of background, during the most recent update, which I think was 2016 or 2017, the city's 28-foot residential street standard was modified to limit its use in only old cul-de-sacs or 1 to 2 block long unextendable streets. So previously we had 2 residential street standards. We had our 28-foot standard that allows parking on one side, and then we had our 34-foot wide street standard that allowed parking on both sides. After about a year or two of review, through the Transportation Commission, those standards were modified, and the 34-foot wide street standard became 36 feet and wide and became essentially the preferred residential street standard. The 28-foot street standard was somewhat limited with this limitation on cul-de-sacs or 1 or 2 block-long unextendable streets. The Planning and Zoning Commission is recently, has been over the last year, working on an update to the city subdivision code and really trying to promote more innovative and compact development that we typically see through planned unit development projects, but without potentially all of the upfront costs that it does take to go through a PUD. So the Planning and Zoning Commission is promoting 2 new alternate development forms that would be permitted by right within the subdivision code. One that would be focused in more of a clustered format, so it may be a situation where you have a property that has some steeply sloped property areas or some floodplain or other sensitive areas. And this model of development would allow you to reduce the overall lot size and then increase the common open space to protect those kind of sensitive areas while getting a slight lot yield increase, so you get a few more lots out of the subdivision to provide a little bit of a financial incentive to do that. The traditional option is really promoting, again, what we consider to be the more traditionally alley rear-loaded lots, so you end up having somewhat longer and skinnier lots that are rear-loaded and accessed off a public alley. Same process there. The lot sizes would be reduced as otherwise allowed or in that zoning district. Common open space requirement would increase with the goal of providing, again, a little bit of additional lot yield in the development to promote more developments using that traditional format. Narrow streets oftentimes reduce both current and future maintenance, replacement costs, provide traffic calming in residential areas, and help facilitate the development of cohesive neighborhoods. And that was kind of a focal point of the discussion at the planning and zoning, is if they're trying to promote this more traditional neighborhood development, having a very wide residential street through the middle of it may be detrimental to that effort. So as I mentioned, this is currently the 36-foot local street standard that has, it's 36 feet from face of curb to face of curb, 2 travel lanes and parking on both sides, where the 28-foot standard is quite a bit more compact, 28 feet from face of curb to face of curb with parking on one side and the 2 travel lanes. Both of the standards include tree lawns of at least 8 to 10 feet in width, as well as 5-foot sidewalks in residential areas. This was that footnote, as I mentioned, that was added to the 28-foot standard that stated that would be limited to use in those circumstances. Planning and Zoning Commission has been working on those updates, as I mentioned before. Traditional would allow that neighborhood that had alley streets loading from the rear, and the conservation subdivision development, that cluster development, will allow for preservation of those sensitive areas. It's contemplated that both of those new development standards would benefit from utilizing a more narrow residential street, and so Planning and Zoning Commission concluded they felt the 28-foot standard would be most appropriate in that circumstance and situation, and therefore would like to encourage the allowance of the 28-foot standard in more developments. So they are recommending removing those limitations on the 28-foot standard. This was also reviewed by operations to look at how much would the city actually save long-term in operations and maintenance of a narrower roadway. So you think over the life of that roadway, this anticipates you would have 3 applications of a slurry seal, 1 AR chip seal application, 1 grind and overlay, and then ultimately once the road and the base is no longer serviceable, you would have a reconstruction of the roadway at the end of the roadway life. You can see the estimated cost per mile of that roadway is just about $2.2 million if you were looking at a 36-foot wide street, and $1.7 million on a 28-foot wide street. So that's a savings of just about $500,000, or about 22% over the life of that road. And every road that ends up getting constructed by development and private development funds the construction of new roads becomes a liability of the city then from here on further to maintain, operate, and repair as necessary. There's also operational efficiencies with a 28-foot wide street when it comes to snow removal. Where we have a clear curb on one side, then snow can be moved from the parking lane, through the lane without parking on the other side of the street into that tree lawn area. Where we have parking on both sides of the street and you encounter parked vehicles, you end up having berms on both sides and you cannot clearly, as easily clear that street. So having one side of the street without on-street parking does provide the operation of moving the snow in that direction and clearing the roadway more easily. So operations did estimate about $14,000 of savings over the life of that roadway as well with respect to snow operations. Narrow roadways, as we're all aware, do help reduce speeds and help calm traffic. More often than not, where we hear complaints about vehicle speed are those larger roadway sections. It's just, as people feel more comfortable, they feel less obstruction on either side of the roadway, they tend to naturally feel that it's safer to go at a higher rate of speed. So going with the narrow roadway standard would help reduce future demand and cost for future traffic calming treatments. As I mentioned, allowing parking only on one side allows snow operations to operate more efficiently as well. The council is also aware that the city jointly funded a regional housing assessment, and as we are all also aware, the housing affordability and attainability is a significant concern within the community. All of these development costs have to get passed on to the future home buyer and owner of the lots on each side of the road. So as we looked at a 22% reduction in the long-term maintenance and operations of that roadway, we would also see that commensurate reduction in the initial construction cost of that roadway. So that could potentially help us to address some of the housing affordability challenges within the community. There are also environmental benefits that could be received. Certainly greater impervious or lesser impervious surfaces ends up having reduced stormwater runoff. We reduce the heat island effect due to that asphalt area being reduced. We also have reduced impacts during construction due to less material and asphalt and oil required for the construction of the roadway, as well as that future maintenance activity on that facility as well. And additional land, less land is required for that roadway and for the right-of-way. That also helps reduce the footprint and increase efficiency of land development and conservation of land from development as necessary. So, the proposed changes before you this afternoon, so we have a simple update, obviously in the table of contents, but really the primary change would be to retitle the 28-foot street standard as our local street standard and the 36-foot street standard as our alternate local street. So it still would remain in our street standards. If there was a development or, in a particular location that the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council felt more on-street parking would be beneficial, that standard would still be there. But we'd be communicating to, for most single-family residential developments, that the 28-foot standard is our preferred roadway for them to implement in their design. We would remove and modify that footnote from the 28-foot standard to remove that limitation in use. And so the drawings, I think we have the full standards in your packet, but really the changes are in the first 3 pages of that packet. So again, underneath the table of contents, we would be changing the titles of drawing 1A and 1B for the local street and the alternate local street. The 28-foot standard shown here would then be titled our local street, and that footnote would be modified to read that this street section shall be used as a minimum standard for all streets, not classified as collector or arterials. So we do have different standards for roadways that are of a higher volume and speed. So this would only apply to local residential streets within a subdivision. And so the street would be used in those instances where it's not classified as a collector or arterial, and where the alternate local street or the 30-foot street standard is not used. And then the 36-foot standard would become now our alternate local street. And that was still an option for a development if they feel like they wanted to provide additional on-street parking, but really be just encouraging to promote the 28-foot standard use. The Planning and Zoning Commission, of course, initiated this request for consideration and is interested in seeing the change occur. Both operations and engineering staff have reviewed it and also recommend approval based on those operational and long-term maintenance benefits to the city. The Transportation Commission reviewed the proposal over the course of 2 meetings, and at their October 8th meeting, they recommended approval of the change to the City Council. So staff's recommendation this afternoon is for the committee to recommend approval of the proposed amended standard construction drawings and associated resolution, which will be in the council packet coming up, or provide staff with further direction. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Art, do you have questions?
Oh, just some clarification perhaps. You indicated the new proposed 28-foot cross-section would be used for cluster development, which makes great sense there, but also for development with the backloading through alleys with garages pointed off of the main street. But would the 28-foot street width also be incorporated for, I suppose, the more usual quarter-acre house on a lot type area as well?
Correct. It'd be promoted as our preferred. So we would have conventional, traditional, and clustered would be kind of the three subdivision forms. Traditional would just follow the standard minimum lot size in the zoning code. So whether it's in the R1 and it's 9,600 square feet or 7,000 square feet in R2, it would just be the minimum lot size and the standard parkland dedication requirement. The clustered and traditional, clustered would be allow that smaller lot size with a corresponding increase in common open space area. And the traditional would be similar, but it would require alley development, rear loading, which would allow for then narrower lot widths, smaller lot areas, and again, commensurate open space increase as well. We would promote the 28-foot standard in all three of those development forms.
Okay. Let's see. Yeah, my only hesitation is the whole parking issue where more and more people seem to treat garages as a storage unit and not a place to stash your car. And so I suppose if we go forward with this, we'll see if it works, and if it doesn't, and streets start becoming crowded up with people's cars while they have the garages full of stuff, we can back it off again in the future at some point. But that's my only hesitation is guest parking and things like that when the homeowners themselves are taking up the entire street, because you got houses on both sides, so everybody's on one side of it parking, and that's my only hesitation. Did the transportation folks in P and Z have any comments on that?
Well, I mean, all developments are required to provide their off-street parking to meet their individual need. And that will have to be self-policing if they're going to use the parking in garages for storage and not utilize that for parking on the street. They're going to feel the consequences of doing that. But, you know, more often than not, that's historically been an issue in somewhat older neighborhoods where there wasn't off-street parking that was required at the time of development. So when you see in the Fort Russell area, you see fairly heavy reliance of on-street parking. We don't see that reliance as heavily in more contemporary single-family developments, and so we feel that there'd be adequate parking on one side to meet that demand. We also don't feel that it's the public's responsibility to both construct, well, they would fund the initial construction, but also to maintain parking for that purpose, and that if they have parking designated in the property in the garage, that they should be utilizing that.
Cool. Yeah, I do like the whole reduction of impervious surfaces, especially with the onset of our stormwater utility that we're contemplating, and to get that under control. I think that's great, and plus the savings of, what it was, $500,000 over the lifespan of a road between the 28-foot and the 34-foot sounds very inviting as well. So, yeah, so I'm in favor of the proposal.
Ann, do you have any questions?
I agree, and I think there are a lot of advantages to that. With my question was just if the Transportation Commission had seen it, and you answered that, Bill, so I do not.
So Bill, I have a couple of questions, and one is that when you look at the parking places in front, and then you have the trees in terms of making green space and parking places, will there be any on-street parking for disability, or is that assumed that you live in the house?
So traditionally in a residential neighborhood, we do not do on-street ADA parking spaces unless there's a unique request
Right.
by an individual.
Right, and so I know that there's signs in certain parts of the residential area, and I'm just curious, will that still exist?
So we generally do not sign parking spaces for ADA. There have been a few unique situations, like in the Fort Russell district, where there was no off-street parking on the property, where there was a request for a designation of an on-street ADA parking space. We'll still review that on a request-by-request basis. But if you, virtually in all other residential neighborhoods, we do not have any on-street ADA parking spaces designated in those residential areas. They have driveways, they have garages to accommodate that need.
Okay, thank you. The other one is that at some point you kept using the word discretion in terms of whether or not it was going to be under the 28 or the 36. There's some guidelines, but if someone wants to change that, is there a process by which they can say, we want it to be larger than 26 feet, 28?
So the city council and planning and zoning commission review, for all new subdivisions, they review the street designs, what streets are going to be what width at that point in time. Planning and zoning commission and the city council have the authority to make a designation or determination or require that a roadway be a certain width based on some consideration the council may have. I mean, that has to obviously be justified, but it would have to be something related to the anticipated parking demand of the adjacent land uses would be likely what we'd see. When I said discretion is more of the developer's discretion as they lay out their subdivision, they would have the option to choose either of these two. It's just that we would encourage that they would use the 28, and most would be happy to do so to reduce their overall development cost. But the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council would retain the authority to require a different street standard because you feel that there is something about the development that is dictating you feel there should be a greater on-street parking presence. We don't really anticipate that in new development because of the fact that most new development provides for all of its off-street parking on its own. But the council certainly has that discretion to do so if you so chose.
So the only, I want to say that I'm very much in favor of this. It sounds like a great idea. It's consistent with our need for affordable housing and cluster living and the rest of it. My one question is really follows up on arts, which is it's almost like a test period because old neighborhoods, it's not really a test period, but the answer is we can go back and review it at some point, right? That we've had concerns about parking on streets like Lilly and such streets. And so the question is, how wide is Lilly?
So a lot of the older streets are 30 feet and we allow parking on both sides.
Okay.
And that's why they feel exceptionally narrow. So if you think about First Street and most of these up in the Fort Russell area, a lot of the older streets, they're 30 feet with parking on both sides. So we're talking 28 with parking only on one side. And it's just not a new standard. All of Rolling Hills is a 28-foot street. Most, all of 6th Street east of Mountain View up there is a 28-foot street with parking on one side. Atani Drive is a 28-foot with parking on one side. So this is not like it's a new standard. We've had this in place for now
The
over
mid-90s.
20 years. So it's not new. It's just a bit of a perspective of, the past public works director and preference for wider streets as they worked through the Transportation Commission and made that footnote that limited its use. But we've had this standard. It's functioned well in many neighborhoods. So this is not something new that we necessarily need to test out. We have seen it. It's in place. It's all throughout the community.
Thank you. And I also wanted to say that I appreciate having read the material, how many steps and how much information we got from other commissions. We got it from Tyler. And it seems like it's pretty unanimous that people are in fact in support of it. And so I think that I've heard from Ann and Art both being in favor of it. And I think it's unanimous coming out of this commission and that it should not go on the consent agreement.
Yeah, because resolution, so it goes on regular agenda. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other reports from staff that we need to look at?
Staff has nothing further.
Then the meeting, any reason not to adjourn it?
Yep.
No,
Nope, let's adjourn it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.